Imagine, like, dedicating years of your life to writing a 300,000-word book just to prove to the world that you are completely, totally unafraid of dying.
Right. Yeah. It sounds less like a triumph of philosophy and more like, I don't know, an obsessive, desperate plea for control.
Exactly. And today, we are opening up this incredibly polarizing piece of literature called The Unfinished Grave. It is, honestly, a massive 4,394-line behemoth of a text,
Oh, it is a staggering undertaking. It attempts to be the definitive ultimate guide to facing human mortality.
which is wild. But we aren't just summarizing the plot here. Today's sources are actually three distinct, razor-sharp literary critiques.
Yeah, they are affectionate but absolutely brutal roasts, really. They just dismantle the book's incredible ambition and expose all the mechanisms underneath the heavy prose.
Right, and what is so fascinating is that these critics simultaneously call it a cathedral built out of the void, an exhausting existential overkill, and a completely rigged game.
That rigged game aspect is so key to understanding the whole thing.
It really is. So for you listening, whether you just love extracting deep knowledge without the, 300-page slog of existential dread, this deep dive is your perfect shortcut. We are going to carve out the absolute core of this bizarre literary experiment.
And there's a lot to carve out.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand the critiques, we first have to understand the deeply weird architecture of the book itself.
Yeah, the architecture is literally the lens through which every other flaw in the text becomes visible. You have to look at the foundational gimmick.
The pseudonyms, right?
Exactly. The book claims to be co-authored by two completely different voices, two distinct pseudonyms.
But they aren't just pen names. They're more like, philosophical action figures smashed together to represent different psychological states.
I love that analogy, action figures kissing.
Yeah. So the primary author is named Martin Becker-Ross, which is literally a Frankenstein name.
Right. It is a fusion of Martin Heidegger, Ernest Becker, and Elizabeth Kübler-Ross just stitched into one entity.
And we really need to break down why the authors chose that specific combination, because it is incredibly heavy.
It is. What's fascinating here is that Heidegger is the philosopher of ontology, the study of being. And his central stance is that humans spend their lives fleeing from the anxiety of death.
Right.
But he argues that only by turning around and fully confronting your inevitable end can you live an authentic life.
And then you have Ernest Becker in the mix.
Yes, the cultural anthropologist who wrote The Denial of Death. Becker argued something almost opposite to Heidegger. He basically said human beings literally cannot face the reality of death without going insane.
Wait, really? Just straight up going insane?
Yeah, therefore, everything humans build, like our cultures, our religions, our careers, art, it is all just a subconscious psychological defense mechanism, all to avoid thinking about our own expiration.
That is dark. And then, of course, Kübler-Ross brings the clinical hospice-level reality, right? The famous stages of grief.
Exactly. So Martin Becker-Ross represents this highly intellectualized, unflinching confrontation with death. But sitting across the table, the supposed co-author is this shadow voice named Mortex Denied.
Mortex Denied. It sounds like a bad comic book villain.
It really does, but it represents the pure, raw instinct of evasion. It is the voice advocating for, building the company, buying the sports car, ignoring the ticking clock, and just running away.
So as one of the sources points out, it is like hosting a dinner party for a nihilist, a paranoid structuralist, and a hospice nurse.
That is exactly what they're trying to do. They attempt to hold this impossible tension between facing death and fleeing from it. And the text desperately wants you, the reader, to recognize its intellectual weight.
Oh, for sure. The intro section, the proem, it explicitly begs you not to treat it as a dry academic text. It claims that academic writing kills the raw, visceral reality of dying.
But then it immediately hits you with this intimidating epigraph, just flexing quotes from those exact existential masters.
Right. Alongside a dedication that just vaguely says, for all who are digging. It is so pretentious.
It is perfectly engineered to sit on a coffee table as an intellectual flex.
Wait, but if a book tells you, hey, don't treat me like a dense academic text, but then it immediately drops 300 pages of heavy Heideggerian ontology on you,
Yeah.
isn't it basically just wearing a rugged hoodie to disguise the fact that it is a textbook?
Oh, 100%. The critiques catch this contradiction instantly. By building this fortress of citations and this elaborate two-author fight, the book is trying to master something fundamentally unmasterable.
It is trying to domesticate death through intellect.
Exactly. One of the critiques just brutalizes this approach. They call it a vanity project for the living. It is just a way to feel like you have conquered your own expiration date simply by trapping it inside a hardback cover.
Wow. And that structural contradiction, it bleeds directly into the actual narrative, doesn't it?
It absolutely does,
Yeah.
because the whole premise promises a fair wrestling match between confronting death and denying it. Mortex denied versus Martin Becker-Ross.
But reading through these roasts, it becomes obvious that this fight is totally fixed.
Yeah, it is a profound illusion of choice. The critics actually referred to this as Charge 4. The text explicitly claims it makes no judgment about whether it is better to face death or evade it.
Right, but then it spends 4,000 pages relentlessly punishing anyone who chooses evasion.
Exactly. Every single character who builds a fortress against mortality watches that fortress get completely annihilated. The Becker-Ross philosophy of facing death unflinchingly, it wins every single round.
The character case studies they pull from the book are just wild. Take the oncologist's father.
Oh, he is a classic example.
Right, here's a guy who has delivered over 3,000 death diagnoses to patients. He treats mortality like a golf score.
He has spent decades turning death into clinical objective data. He uses the suffering of others as a shield, basically. By intellectualizing the deaths of his patients, he convinces his subconscious that death is something that happens to them, not him.
But then, surprise, surprise, he gets his own terminal diagnosis.
Yeah.
And that intellect just chatters.
He faces the exact terrifying crisis you would expect. The narrative aggressively strips him of his armor just to prove the thesis that data cannot save you from dread.
Right. And then there's the young man with cystic fibrosis who reads The Death of Ivan Ilyich and perfectly magically mirrors its lessons.
Yes, he's basically just a literary echo chamber.
But my favorite is the CEO, Gerald Fenn. He's the absolute poster child for Mortex Denied.
Oh, Gerald is fascinating. He optimizes his biomarkers, pushes through a minor stroke to work a 16-hour day, and he literally builds a private immortality compound.
He treats biohacking and productivity like modern sandbags against the flood. But what happens to him?
Well, he gets cancer twice, his compound completely fails him, and he dies terrified and alone.
Just a total miserable defeat.
Gerald's arc really reveals how the authors view modern wellness and optimization culture. They see it as Ernest Becker's mortality denial in its purest, most modern form.
It's like tracking your sleep, taking supplements, doing cold plunges.
Exactly. The book argues these aren't just about feeling good. They are physical manifestations of a subconscious belief that if you perform the rituals of health perfectly, death legally is not allowed to touch you.
Wow. And the narrative just aggressively punishes Gerald for that arrogance. Oh, wait, before Gerald dies, we have to talk about that incredibly contrived scene.
The park bench?
Yes. One of the critics just tears it apart. Gerald is having an existential breakdown on a park bench. And this nameless older woman with a small dog sits down next to him.
She happens to be dying, but she's perfectly serene.
Exactly. She turns to him and drops this flawless, quotable wisdom. She says, "When you stop running, you start seeing." And then she just vanishes.
It is hilarious. One critique brilliantly refers to her as the most load-bearing piece of furniture in the entire novel.
Balsa wood furniture.
Yeah, she's made entirely of balsa wood. She has no interior life, no personal history, no messy fears of her own. She is merely narrative machinery imported into the scene to dispense a lesson.
Her only function is to show the reader that Gerald was offered profound wisdom, he rejected it, and therefore his miserable death is his own fault.
Right, and the underlying flaw here is that every single character in this mammoth book gets the exact lesson they need, perfectly timed.
Even James Aldrich, right, the character who dies totally unprepared and afraid.
Yes, even his death gets grammatically softened. The narrator swoops in to comfort the reader, saying the body knew what to do even if the mind did not.
It is as if the book is just terrified of letting a character just die wrong or chaotically.
They are deeply afraid of randomness. A meaningless, chaotic death offers no philosophical takeaway. It leaves the reader with nothing to hold on to.
So the prose constantly cleans up the mess.
Exactly. It claims to look death in the eye, but it flinches by insisting on order and meaning where there genuinely is none.
Which brings me to this question. Reading through these roasts, I kept looking for a character who felt like a real, messy human being. You know, someone who almost escaped the author's heavy-handed thesis.
The critics actually zero in on two specific women who show the extreme boundaries of this book's control: Margaret and Carol.
Okay, let's start with Margaret.
Margaret Vance is a fascinating study in philosophical extremes. She is a hospice patient with ovarian cancer, and the book presents her as the ultimate idealized patient.
She refuses pain medication, right?
Yes, she refuses pain meds. She rejects the comforting, soft voices of the nurses. She even turns away the pet therapy golden retriever.
Who turns away a golden retriever?
Someone who wants to, quote, pay attention to her dying.
Hmm.
She lies there documenting her agony like a landscape painter just to observe it.
Here is where it gets really interesting, because I have to push back here. Isn't there real emotional weight there? The sources admit there are flashes of brilliance in her notes.
The writing in Margaret's section is praised as gorgeous, absolutely, and real dying people might act this way sometimes. But Margaret is only this.
What do you mean?
Well, she is essentially acting like the queen of phenomenology. She is attempting to experience her physical pain purely as neutral data, stripping away the emotional terror.
Okay, but treating your own horrific pain as a fascinating science experiment requires you to completely alienate everyone around you. She pushes her own family away to achieve this state.
Exactly. And that is the blind spot. The narrative completely ignores the messy reality of that choice. Are her kids hurt? Is she secretly lonely when the lights go out?
The book refuses to explore that.
Because exploring it would make her less useful as a philosophical symbol. She is a planted philosopher, not a messy human.
Okay, so Margaret is the ideal. But then we get to Carol. And Carol is honestly my favorite character in this whole breakdown.
Carol is the one who almost beats the book's thesis. She is the practical widow from the Westbrook family.
Right, when she gets her diagnosis, she doesn't read Tolstoy or analyze her being. She just makes lists. She keeps her house clean. She sails through the illness with utter efficiency, refusing any sort of emotional performance.
Carol uses mundane routines, chores, lists, daily habits as her defense mechanism. And unlike Gerald Fenn's biohacking, Carol's defense actually works.
Because lists create microfutures.
Right. Exactly. Every tick box implies you will exist 5 minutes from now to complete the next one. Her evasion of deep existential thought keeps her genuinely happy and grounded.
So she is on track to die at 92, totally content, having never confronted the void, which means more text denied is winning.
And the sincerity of the book couldn't handle that. The authors couldn't let denial win because they felt it would be philosophically irresponsible to the reader.
So they force her to break.
Yes. In the very final moments, the narrative forces her into this porousness moment. Her daughter says something to her, and Carol replies with this heavy line, "I'm trying."
They force her to learn a profound lesson at the buzzer.
They did. They felt intensely responsible for you, the reader. They couldn't let Carol just fade out efficiently, because then what is the takeaway? Just make a to-do list and you won't fear death.
That would ruin their entire Heideggerian setup.
Completely. And this desperate need to control the takeaway, it spills completely out of the fictional story and into the physical object of the book itself.
Oh man, this detail blew my mind. Because after 300 pages of this incredibly dense, highly controlled novel, you hit a 50-page meta-apparatus at the end.
It is wild.
In an explosion of extra material. There is a glossary, there are meditations for the dying, questions for reflection, and a whole essay called On the Process of Composition.
It is so much.
He wrote the book Andy, the study guide, Andy, the grief counseling pamphlet, all in one.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this meta-apparatus really exposes the book's deepest flaw and its greatest vulnerability.
How so?
Well, within these 50 pages, the authors admit that more text denied is just the residue of the philosophical fusion. But more importantly, in the acknowledgments, they explicitly credit Heidegger, Becker, and Kübler-Ross for the actual ideas.
But in the fiction, the characters don't cite those thinkers. Margaret and the oncologist are presented as organically stumbling into these profound, earth-shattering realizations all on their own.
Exactly. The fiction borrows all the genius, while the appendix quietly hands out the credit. It reveals that the book isn't really a guide for the dying.
Right. And amidst all this highly controlled, obsessive structuring, there is this bizarre motif that one of the sources points out. The tomatoes.
Ah, yes. The tomatoes motif.
One of the AI critics highlighted it as a totally chaotic yet respected choice by the authors.
Yeah.
It is like they were suffocating under their own heavy ontological poetry and suddenly realized they needed something tangible, so they just aggressively started writing about tomatoes.
It is a brief rupture in their otherwise perfect control, and it shows that underneath it all, it is just an obsessive 300,000-word panic attack for the living.
So what does this all mean for you listening? When you filter The Unfinished Grave through these sharp critiques, you see an incredibly ambitious, borderline psychotic cathedral built out of the void.
It is honest, and it is highly skilled.
It really is. It contains genuine emotional hits. But at its core, it flinches at the exact moments it claims to be brave. It softens death by insisting that every demise contains a neat, philosophical lesson.
The title claims the grave is unfinished, but the authors ensured every single narrative arc in the book was dug, measured, and filled to exact specifications.
They couldn't leave a single variable to chance. Which leaves us with a totally different question to mull over.
It really does. Because if the ultimate form of mortality denial is trying to organize, script, and intellectualize death into perfect lessons, is it even possible for a living person to write an honest book about dying?
Or is the act of writing the book just another fortress we build to keep the fear out?
That is the lingering question.
Yeah.
Is building any kind of legacy just the ultimate, most sophisticated form of mortality denial?
Oh, wow. If the act of writing a masterpiece is just another way of trying to live forever that flips this entire thing on its head, are we ever really accepting our end, or are we just trying to leave a very heavy ghost behind?
It makes you wonder.
It really does. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the things you build, and we will catch you on the next one.